Randumb Rants. Like and subscribe. And we back in Cabrini Green. You already know. We back in them projects. Y'all see the thumbnail. This is a classic episode rant, right? The rent party. You guys remember this episode. Now, before we even get into the rent party, right? We have to acknowledge the historical importance of this episode. This was the final episode of season 3, okay? And more importantly, it was the last time we would ever see James Evans alive and in the flesh on Good Times. It's a fact, right? It's a fact. Now, you guys already know, right? At the time this episode originally aired, viewers had no reason to believe they were watching James for the final time. There was no dramatic farewell, no emotional speech, no indication that the actual actor, of course, John Amos, wouldn't be returning for next season, right? This is before the internet. People wasn't as nosy as they are now, right? Yeah, James was simply being James throughout this episode, right? And you guys clicked on it. This episode is called The Rent Party. Now, you got to understand, right? The Evans family, they'll get into the definition of a rent party, right? But let's talk about the things that you're going to get on a rent party menu. See, you're always going to get fried chicken, potato salad, a dinner roll, and some pound cake, okay? All right, so we just had to get that out the way because they're not going to really discuss the food that they're eating here. But I just want you guys to know that's what they're eating at this rent party. Okay, everybody hasn't been to one. I mean, coming up now, you don't even know your neighbors, right? You don't care when they get kicked out. You may laugh at that, but back in the day, people loved their neighbors and they borrowed sugar and milk and cookies and little things like that, right? But nonetheless, though, right? Now, I also have to bring up that this is actually a rare episode, right? That does not feature JJ. Yeah, see, he went to St. Louis in the script, but we all know he was beefing because he was Urkeling the show. Well, I guess I can't even say that either. Let's say he was becoming a Fonzie, right? And his little quirky dynamite references that never has nothing to do with these classic plots, right? But those lines are going over with the audience. And naturally, some people don't take a liking to that, right? And that's a whole nother video for a whole nother day, right? But we're still in Rants world, right? And watching this episode today, it feels completely different, right? Because while the Evans family is singing and dancing and coming together to help a struggling neighbor, we know something now that they didn't know at the time. This was the end of an era when it comes to this show, right? Because we already know, I've already covered it, right? I'll provide the thumbnail and whatnot. But by the beginning of season 4, James would be deleted in an automobile accident. We already know this, right? And of course, the actual actor was dismissed from the series. I know you guys like to get in the comments and tell me what really happened, as if I don't know that, right? Come on now. But anyway, right? Good Times was never the same after this episode. So we're going to break it down like I always do. You're going to get the, oh Lord, you're going to get all that, right? But I had to give you the history of this particular episode. This is not just a regular episode, okay? Now, let's get into the actual show. And we see James is eating and he says, "Hey, Florida, you got any more of this stuff?" And Florida says, "Oh, Lord, sure, honey. I didn't know you liked it so much." And James says, "Are you kidding? I love it. I like it better every time you make it. It's my favorite meal." "What is it?" And Florida says, "Sweet baby Jesus. Now, James, you know what it is. It's a 3-course inflation dinner. Course it ain't beef, course it ain't lamb, and course it ain't pork." And James says, "Well, I ain't eating these seconds till I hear you say, course it ain't horse." And he's joking, but he's really not, right? And he tells Flo and that Fro Thanks for keeping it warm. And Florida says, well, I knew you'd be in late. And James says, yeah, I figured that this overtime I'm making tonight ought to just about cover Junior's trip for St. Louis. And Florida says, oh, Lord, James, I worry when JJ's gone. You think he's going to be all right? And James says, oh, for the 100th time, Florida, yes. And here go Florida. Oh, Christ. Well, it's cold in St. Louis, and I only packed him one leather jacket, 2 sweaters, and 2 pairs of long johns. And James says, baby, the boy's only going to an art show, not the Winter Olympics. And Florida says, Father God, I know you, James. You're just as worried about him as I am. And James says, would you stop calling Christ? God damn it. This is the 3rd season, and you do it all the time. But sure I am. And at least I didn't make no scene when he left last night. And Florida says, lie again and God will strike you down. I didn't make no damn scene. And James says, you didn't, huh? That's the first time I ever seen somebody trying to stop a Greyhound bus. And now we see Mike, and he's taking JJ's lines because we already said that he's not in on this episode, right? And he's arguing with the Cabrini Green Queen, right? And she's telling Mike, yeah, you broke my record. You know you broke it. And Mike says, Thelma, I did not break your record. You pushed me into the record player. And Thelma says, I did not. Couldn't you see I was dancing? And little feminine Mike says, oh, that's what you were doing? I thought you backed into an open fuse box. And Florida says, oh, Lord. All right, you two. That's enough. And Thelma says, Ma, he owes me $4.95 for a new Gladys Knight and the Pips album. And of course, it's 1976, but with inflation, Mike owes Thelma $29, right? And Thelma knows Mike don't have that money, right? And Mike, he's not taking no accountability. He says, Thelma, you still have your album? And he hands her both halves of her record and says, here's Gladys Knight and here are the Pips. I guess they ain't singing together no more. And Thelma says, look, don't get smart. You gonna pay for this. And Mike says, Thelma, I'm not gonna give you 1 penny for that album. And turns around and sees James, right? And this is one of the final scenes we really get to see him be a good father, right? But when Mike sees James' face, he turns around and says, sister dear, how much did you say your album costs? Clearly taking JJ's lines, right? And Florida says, Jesus, I thought we were going to have a nice quiet weekend with JJ gone. And Willona busts into Evans' unlocked Cabrini Green apartment like she always does. And she says, hi, y'all. Wait till you hear this. And James says, there go a nice quiet weekend. And Willona says, that's right, James. Pick on somebody who was just involved in a holdup. Yeah, I was working at the boutique tonight late, and because it was our annual dollar sale and whatnot, it used to be a penny sale, but with inflation, everything goes up. And James Kirk, he's like, oh, come on, Willona, what about the holdup? And Willona says, oh, yeah, well, anyway, I was selling the last of those jumpsuits. Flo, you should have came in there and got one of those. It would have looked bad on you. And Florida says, oh, yes, Lord, I could wear that to church. You mean the ones with the matching sweaters and the full pockets on the front? Willona, I told you to put one away for me. It would have gone perfect with that new purse I just got from. And James cuts off and says, damn it, Florida, you don't even have a neck. She's talking about a holdup, not handbags. And Willona says, yeah, so anyway, I was just getting ready to close up and this dude walks in and pulls out a tool and says, give me all the cash you got. And Thelma asks Willona, you did what he said, right? And Willona says, you jiving? When a dude points anything hard at me, honey, I gift wraps whatever they ask for, putting Thelma on to game, right? And Florida says, oh, Lord, girl, you must be shaken. I'm going to make you a cup of tea. And James says, yeah, Willona, tell me what the dude looked like. And Willona says, well, it was a tall white dude with an afro. And nobody brings that situation up anymore in this episode because, see, nobody cares about that. And now the Evans phone rings and Mike answers and he says, hello. Oh, you want to speak to JJ? Hold on a minute. And Willona says, what's going on? I thought JJ was in St. Louis. And Mike says, Willona, he is, but while he's out of town, he doesn't want any of these chicks to know he's out of circulation. And then Mike does his lame JJ impersonation talking about some, hello. Yes, this is the doctor of love speaking, ready to fill your prescription. Say what? Yeah, baby, of course our date is on for Monday night. Will mama just make sure you dress for the test and I will do my best to take care of the rest. And Willona says, ooh, child, I feel sorry for y'all. Now you got 2 of them in the family. And someone knocks on the door and James says, you want to get the door, Junior number 2? And Feminine Mike says, getting the door, mocking JJ, of course. Like, why are you even over there by the pans? You know, like, you have no business being over there, right? But anyway, right, we see it's Bookman, right? And Bookman walks in, he says, evening, folks. And James gets up and says, what you want here? You know, like, what you doing here, Bookman? Ain't nobody called for a janitor. And Bookman says, you know, you guys just don't appreciate me. Evans, as a matter of fact, your wife called me about a leaking pipe. So naturally, I rushed up here. And Florida says, Satan, I rebuke you. Well, you must have come by covered wagon because I called you 6 weeks ago. James already fixed that pipe. And Bookman says, oh, that's bad, Evans. You know, I hate this, but I'm going to have to report you. It clearly states in your lease that tenants aren't supposed to touch the plumbing. And Florida says, Jesus. It also states tenants ain't supposed to live in a lake. And Bookman says, you know we get a lot of calls, Miss Evans. These things take time. And James says, yeah, I can imagine. It probably took about 4 weeks to drag that lard up the stairs. And Willona says, listen, Mr. Booger, the last 10 weeks I've been telling you I got a broken light switch in my living room. What are you going to do about it? And Bookman says, yeah, well, I'll try to squeeze it into my schedule. And James says, well, why don't you see if you can squeeze your hawks through that doorway? And Bookman says, you know, you just can't be nice to you people. And James says, you people, get out of here, buffalo butt. Go on. And as Bookman is opening the door, Wanda is walking in Evans' apartment, right? And Bookman says, hey, Miss Williams, you know I was just on my way up to your place. And Wanda says, good, because I ain't there, and slammed the door in his face. And Florida is cracking up. She says, oh, Lord, Wanda, you better be careful how you treat that janitor. Someday you may need him for something. And Wanda says, well, I don't think so. Florida, I came down to borrow a couple candles if you got any. And here go Mike, not staying in the child's place. He asks Miss Williams, what are you going to do with those candles? And Wanda's lying. She says, I have a date for tonight, you know, for dinner. And I want to be a romantic. And Mike, once again, being grown, right? He asks, you still go out on dates? And Wanda's lying to this little boy. She says, why not? I figure I'm at that in-between age. I'm too old to marry and too young to bury. And James says, yeah, tell him, Wanda. Just because the game is in the 4th quarter don't mean it's over, huh? James doesn't know he's actually living in the 4th quarter himself, right? It's just so crazy. It's so crazy. I had to stop the rant and just like, how ironic that you say that, right? And Thelma gives Wanda the candles and she goes on about her way, right? And Florida says, oh Lord, that Wanda sure is something. Always joking, always in just great spirits. And Willona walks up and says, she fooled you too, huh, Flo? Yeah, I heard all about it in the laundromat this morning. She is broke. And Florida says, oh, Jesus, Willona, that's a disease we all got. And Willona says, yeah, but you ain't heard the worst of it, honey. She's behind 3 months on the rent. She just got a notice this morning. If she don't pay it all by the end of this week, she's going to be evicted. You know the real reason why she wanted those candles? Yeah, they turned her lights off this morning. And Florida says, oh, Christ's name, amen. But how could that be? She gets Social Security. Not to mention it just happened this damn morning. How did you hear about that damn quick, Willona? And here go James foreshadowing again. He says, Florida, that ain't enough to live on. That's just enough to die on. And Thelma says, oh, Ma, this is awful. There must be something we can do. And Florida gonna ask her husband, you paid all our bills last month. What do we got left over? And James says, more bills. You don't pay a damn thing. So don't even think about telling me what to do with this money that I make for our family and your tiny afro. And Mike says, Daddy, there must be something we can do. We can't just let them put her out there on the street like that. Maybe we can protest. You know, that's what he always say. Like, Mike, damn, no, we can't. What are we protesting? This lady ain't pay her damn rent. Mike, don't you got a basketball game or something to do? Like a electric football? Wasn't they doing an electric football? Feminine boy? Look, I apologize. Let me get back to the rant. I'm sorry. I gotta, y'all know how I get. My apologies, y'all. And Florida says, Oh, Jesus, Father God, maybe there's something we can do. James, you remember what we used to do for folks who got in trouble with their rent? And James Willona says, a rent party. And Thelma asks, what's a rent party, Daddy? And James says, well, that's where you have a party and you provide fried chicken, potato salad, pound cake, and one dinner roll, right, to a guest, and you charge them and then you provide them entertainment and whatnot, and you give all that money to the person in trouble with their rent. And Thelma says, hey, that's a great idea. I could help with the cooking. And Mike says, oh no, then we all gonna be in trouble. And Florida excited like she's about to go to Bible study. You know, she started singing Negro hymns. Then she says, oh, we can do it, James. I just know we can. The only problem is how we going to let everybody know about it. And Willona says, honey, there ain't no problem. You give me 10 minutes on that telephone and I'll have you at standing room only. And Thelma adds, and yeah, I know we can get the recreation room. And James says, that's a good idea, Florida, but you're forgetting one problem. Wanda's pride. Now, if she didn't tell you what she really needed them candles for, she sure ain't gonna let you give her a rent party. And Florida says, I rebuke Beelzebub. Who says Wanda has to know this party is for her? All we gotta do is get the food and entertainment. And James says, and adhesive tape to put over Willona's mouth so she don't tell Wanda about the party. And then, of course, you know, they get into a little fake fight, right? And now we're at the rent party and James is hosting, right? He's like, all right. Well, I'm glad you can make it. All right, now get over there and enjoy yourself some of that good fried chicken and potato salad. Yeah, go get some of that bird. And Thelma's there looking bad, of course, you know. And we see Florida and Willona, they're passing out desserts and whatnot in the place that I mentioned earlier, right? And Wanda walks in and James says, hey, how you doing, Wanda? And Wanda says, James, I want to know how come Michael won't let me pay to come to this party like everybody else. And James like, well, Wanda, see, it's the kind of party where senior citizens get in for free. And Wanda says, no, it's a rent party and I want to pay my own way. Who is this party for anyway? And James says, I'd answer that, but I gotta make this introduction. Excuse me, Wanda, excuse me. Folks, could you quiet down, please? Have a seat, please. I got a special announcement to make. Under no circumstances must you stop eating or drinking, please, because the ladies over at the refreshment bar told me they're not busy enough. And of course, Florida and Willona, they blown about that, right? But then James says, now the next act, I know you're going to enjoy him because he's talented, he's bright, and he's feminine. Yes, he's my son. I know you're going to enjoy him, the pride of the projects, Michael Evans. And Michael Evans, right? This was always my favorite part of the show. He does, at the time when I'm watching this as a kid, right, I didn't know that he was doing this song like on Soul Train. Like Michael Evans was really performing this song, right? I know y'all in the comments, y'all gonna be like, right, you ain't know that? I might be a little younger than y'all. Understand that, you know, but I ain't mad though, right? So I'm gonna sing it, don't worry. Y'all already know, right? Might get up there. He the springs in the air, and there's magic everywhere when you're young and in love. Life seems to be a world of fantasy when you're young and in love. Each night's like 4th of July, when stars spangle the sky. The moon at night seems to shine twice as bright when you're young and in love. Dreams can come true if you believe they do when you're young and in love. Though many teardrops are bound to fall, true love will conquer all when you're young and in love. And James is embarrassing Mike. He screams, all right, can that boy sing? Ain't he feminine as hell? And Mike ends it with like a real groovy dance. That is the most memorable part of the show. I actually was going to narrate that, but I recorded it for you guys. So here it is. And you see Florida about to have a heart attack, trying to make it about her. You see it, right? And then she says, James, aren't you proud of him? I just wonder where he got that voice from. And James says, what do you mean where he got that voice from? You ever heard me singing in the shower? When you're young. He can't really sing, right? And Florida says, oh, Lord, that's why I wondered where he got that voice from. And Florida and them walk off, right? Because they're going to go on later, right? And Bookman walks up and he says, well, what do we have here, Evans? A little party, huh? And James says, yeah, and it ain't against the law either. And Bookman says, well, it is if you're charging money. You just can't stop breaking that lease, can you? And James say, well, I can think of a couple other things I like to break. And Bookman says, it hurts. I hate to have to do this, but I'm going to have to shut this party down. And James says, now, come on, Bookman. You know it's a rent party, man. Ain't you got no heart underneath all that blubber? And Bookman says, there's one way you can persuade me to forget about all this. I understand you have a little entertainment going on. Hey man, why don't you put me on this show? And James says, no animal acts. And Bookman says, okay, suit yourself. This party's good as closed. And James says, all right, come on now, Bookman. Come on. All right, you're in. But what else can you do besides eat, man? And then Bookman starts doing an amazing Muhammad Ali impersonation, right? See, Bookman had a trade and did impersonations, all right? And he showed this talent every chance he got on the show. Like every chance he got. And now we see James. He's like, okay, ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? We have an added attraction tonight, which proves that you can find talent anywhere you look, even underneath a rock. May I introduce our own head janitor, Nathan, the moocher, Bookman. And Bookman does his impersonations and crushes the crowd. And he wasn't as good as Mike, but he was decent, right? And Mike says, hey, Daddy, we made all that. And James says, that's right, Michael. There's a lot of kind people living in the projects, and all of them care about Wanda. And Mike asks, well, when are we going to give her the money? And James says, oh, not now, not so soon. The show's not over yet. And James gets back on stage and says, ladies and gentlemen, as we promised, we've been providing you first-class, top-notch entertainment tonight. May I present a group of stars who have come here specifically for this purpose. The world-famous, internationally known Supremes. And it's not the Supremes. No. It's Thelma, Willona, and Florida doing the Supremes hits. Stop in the Name of Love. You guys remember that song? Stop in the Name of Love. Classic hit song. Everybody knows that song, right? And when you rewatch this show, you clearly hear Florida's deep ass voice messing up the song, talking about some damn think it over. Think it over. Haven't I been good to you? Like, really, Florida? Stop. But they each do a verse, right? And they all display their talent. See, you guys are probably already familiar, right? Willona sings the Jeffersons theme song. Everybody knows that. It's in the credits, right? She sings that. And Thelma can really dance, like she really does that. And you see, they get to display their talents because, as you can see, JJ's not on this episode, taking up all the lines and all the limelight, right? So they get to do this, and Florida is offbeat throughout this whole performance. I'm going to try to take pictures and really show you guys, like, she's always a little late on the movements, and she don't have a neck, and she has big, burly Jerome Bettis shoulders, like she's a little league running back, with that little fro in the 70s and whatnot. But they did a good job to 70s standards, right? To the 1970s, they killed it. I don't even know I can say that word on YouTube, but we already in the rant now, right? So forget it. I'm not cutting this off. We ain't editing it, right? And Florida says, oh Lord, I think we put this off long enough. Wanda, come up here. We've got a surprise for you. Wanda, this whole party was for you. And Wanda asks, what's going on here? And James says, well, Wanda, we made enough money off this party to pay your rent for the last few months and next month too. And Wanda says, no, I can't. I couldn't. I won't accept it. And James says, we knew you would say that. That's why we didn't give the money to you. We're going to give it to Florida. She'll take it down to the housing office first thing in the morning and give it to them. And Wanda says, now, Florida, I don't take no handouts. And Florida say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Oh, Wanda, now this is not charity. We all doing this for a very selfish reason. Nobody nobody here is about to let you move from this project. And Willona says, and you want to know why, Wanda? Because we love you. And Wanda says, thank you. Thank all of you. And in one of James' last scenes, he's still a gentleman, right? He tells Wanda, excuse me, may I? And Wanda says, hit it, Willie. And they start dancing, right? And this is the last time we ever see James Evans sing it, right? Now, I've already covered the big move, so please feel free to check that out. It basically continues this story, right? But, Randumb Rants, like and subscribe.